On February 9th of 2004, 21-year-old UMass student Maura Murray drove from her dorm in Amherst, Massachusetts to the White Mountains of New Hampshire.
At approximately 7:27 p.m., Maura spun out her 1996 Saturn on a hairpin turn on Route 112 in North Haverhill. There has never been a credible sighting of Maura since.
Maura is 5 foot 7 inches tall. She weighs 120 pounds, and she has brown hair and hazel eyes.
If you have any information regarding Maura's disappearance, please submit it to us, the Murray family through their Facebook page, or the New Hampshire State Police Cold Case Unit.
This is Missing Maura Murray. Welcome back to the Missing Maura Murray podcast. I am Tim, here today with Lance in the Crawlspace Studios in Wormtown. Lance, how are you today?
Doing really well, and I'm actually very excited about this slight deviation of Missing Maura Murray.
Yeah, this is really an interesting episode that we are bringing you today. It's not so much Maura Murray related like, say, the last episode was where we had Maura's brother Kurt in. This one is sort of to be used as an example of what can be done to further cases, cold cases, and Maura's case.
It's cold case related. We're talking to the inventor of the M-Vac. Actually, he's the son of the inventor, but he carries the torch now of the M-Vac, the DNA recovery system that is absolutely remarkable. And we met him at ASOC back in April in Albany.
Yep, the American Investigative Society of Cold Cases. He was there and he presented with his incredible presentation on the M-Vac. If you want to check it out, it's m-vac.com, and it really is a revolutionary DNA retrieval system.
And we're talking about Jared Bradley here, and Jared Bradley's father is Dr. Bruce Bradley. He basically invented a wet vac system that created a small tornado of solution and pulls DNA out of surfaces and is a lot more thorough and a lot more comprehensive in the result as opposed to swabbing.
And one of these should be in every state, in every department, in every lab in the country, because the retrieval rate for DNA using the M-Vac is head and shoulders above swabbing or any other DNA retrieval method. So we wanted to bring you this to show you what can be done with you, private citizens, and someone like Jared Bradley, what he's doing right now. He's literally trying to change the world and save lives with the M-Vac.
And he says how much the M-Vac costs, and when you think about it, in a little isolation chamber, the number he says sounds high, but when you actually allocate resources and you manage a budget in terms of maybe we should get this because the cost savings is going to be astronomical compared to the costs that you spend for the M-Vac, and you can put these cold cases to rest, and you can even use this to prevent future serials, future abuses, future sexual assaults. I mean, it really, like you said, is a revolution.
Lance, did you know that over a dozen homicides have taken place in the state of New Hampshire since the beginning of February?
Since the beginning of February? That's crazy.
We just want to use this as sort of one example of what can be done with more resources. And I know we hear all the time, we need resources. Well, it's a legitimate problem. In the state of New Hampshire, they have a Senate bill named 130 that was introduced. It's a bipartisan bill, and it was introduced by Jeb Bradley, and it's got a lot of support out there.
No relation to M-Vac Bradley.
That's correct. I know. A couple of Bradleys.
Easy to remember, though. Now, the bill title is Establishing Positions in the Department of Justice and the Department of Safety to Work in the Cold Case Homicide Unit. And like you said, this is an example of how you can help. You can lobby your local Senate, you can lobby your local government, and you can introduce a bill like this as well.
Yeah, if you're outside of the state of New Hampshire, that exists. So really, this is just a start at trying to help the problem. And as far as New Hampshire and Maura Murray's case, I know we said that we don't talk too much about Maura in this episode, but if Senate Bill 130 is passed, that could have direct connection on solving Maura's case. because it is a bill that will add resources to the cold case unit and allow another detective to be hired.
Or perhaps it would allow an M-Vac to be purchased along with that detective. Either way, it is one of those things that you can do, and by no means, like, do not stop doing the boots on the ground. Do not stop creating a presence and being vocal about Maura's disappearance or any one of these cold cases. But you can also put your resources to this use here. Molly Bish's family did it in Massachusetts, and this bill 130 is being introduced in New Hampshire. And no matter where you're listening, as long as you're within the United States, you can do this as well.
So as a citizen detective sending tips, digging up info, we think that's great. Sending it to the right place, that's even better. But you can organize things like this. This is just organized by families of victims who are victims themselves, approach their legislators and say, look, we need the resources to help solve these cases. Senate Bill 130 and the M-Vac interview, they're really just examples of what can be done with the energy of a community like this one when it's directed in the right way. Okay, now before we get to the interview, just wanted to remind you that we have a live show in Nashua, New Hampshire, next Wednesday, May 22nd at 6 p.m. It's called Missing Brianna Maitland. We are speaking on a panel with Bruce Maitland, Brianna's father, private investigators Greg Overacker and Lou Barry, and our friend Chloe Cantor from the new podcast True Crime Twins.
And this is a really unique opportunity to ask Greg, Lou, and Bruce questions about Brianna's disappearance. You can also ask us questions and Bruce questions about Private Investigations for the Missing, which is the nonprofit organization that Bruce Maitland runs and we're on the board of. It is to provide resources for families of missing loved ones when law enforcement and other agencies have run out of resources. So someone like Greg Overacker can get his expenses taken care of if he's looking for someone's missing daughter. And all of the proceeds from this show go towards Private Investigations for the Missing. So you know when you purchase your ticket, that is a donation to a nonprofit organization. And ticket sales are going really well. It's a very intimate engagement. And we're just about sold out, but you can go to crawlspace-media.com or Brown Paper Tickets, and you can click right from our website, crawlspace-media.com, and you'll see the little banner there. Just click that. It'll redirect you, and you can purchase your tickets. 35 Railroad Square, Wednesday, May 22nd. It's the Riverwalk Cafe at 6 p.m.
Okay, and our entire Missing Maura Murray catalog is available on Stitcher Premium. Check it out at stitcherpremium.com. We're also doing really fun creator commentaries. And also, Lance, patreon.com/crawlspacepodcast is where you got to go to get another weekly show from us. We break down true crime news. We break down the episodes that we do here at Crawlspace Media, so it gives you a little added insight into these episodes. And it's really just a good time. So check it out at patreon.com/crawlspacepodcast.
And if you're on the fence about going to CrimeCon is in New Orleans, beautiful New Orleans, June 7th, 8th, and 9th. And if you are on the fence, like I said, just cross over that fence. Do promo code CrawlSpace19. That gives you 10% off your standard pass. You'll go to CrimeCon. If you're a podcast fan in the true crime genre, there's Podcast Row. You can just come right up to any one of us and talk to us for as long as you want. But they also have a lot of really cool exhibitions and a lot of really cool seminars, safety courses. You can meet Christopher Darden, who was part of the O.J. Simpson prosecution.
Be like, what the hell, man?
What the hell? Why'd you haven't put the gloves on? But that's promo code CrawlSpace19. Do yourself a favor, save 10%.
We'll see you there. Promo code CrawlSpace19. So thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you enjoy this conversation with Jared Bradley of M-Vac. Follow him on Twitter. Check out his site. Share it. Talk about it. M-Vac is a revolutionary DNA retrieval product that will help save lives.
And Google how to introduce a bill to your local Senate in order to get something like this going in your state, just like New Hampshire did with Senate Bill 130.
Welcome to the show, Jared Bradley. How are you today, Jared?
I'm doing awesome. Appreciate the chance to come on.
Well, welcome to the Crawl Space Studios here. Hope you're feeling comfortable in our little confinement, our little corner of the world.
Yeah, well, I'm just hanging out here in my little corner of the world, so It's amazing what technology can do for us, right?
Exactly.
Sure is. Speaking of technology,
I was going to go speaking with Corner of the World. Where are you? Where are you broadcasting out of right now?
I'm actually in Utah. Our office is in a little suburb of Salt Lake called Sandy. I'm actually working out of my home office today, but yeah, that's I'm usually up in Sandy.
Okay.
And yeah, right snuggled in the Rocky Mountains. So
that's God's country out there.
yes, it is.
Now, we met you last month in April of 2019 at the American Investigative Society of Cold Cases conference, their 2019 conference. And we saw your presentation, and we were just blown away by it.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Yeah, it was it's kind of the standard presentation that I give. Let me try to get rid of some of this light here. I give this presentation quite a bit, whenever I'm out demonstrating the M-Vac to different agencies, around the world, really. So yeah, it was a great opportunity. They needed to fill a little bit of time, and so yeah, jumped up there and said, "Hey man, I'll take the whole hour if you'll give it to me." We got some cases that we talked about, some of the cases that the M-Vac's worked and how it works. So yeah, it was perfect.
About 2 minutes into your presentation, I think Tim and I both kind of looked at each other and we were like, this guy has to be on one of the shows soon, because what you've done with the technology is really remarkable with DNA technology and DNA recovery. For anyone who doesn't know what the M-Vac is, can you give us a synopsis of where it started and what it is now?
Oh, sure. Yeah. The best way to describe it that I've always found is think of like a medical grade and a sterile carpet cleaner. It's just like a carpet cleaner sprays a solution down and then vacuums it up at the same time. That's exactly the action behind the M-Vac. And it's my dad actually invented it. And he was a microbiologist and had a small service lab in southern Idaho. Back in 1993, when the E. coli outbreak, the Jack in the Box E. coli outbreak, you guys may remember that.
Yeah.
Killed a number of kids and made a whole bunch of people sick. And growing up on a ranch, that really bothered him. And so he started analyzing the problem and realized that in the food industry, their ability to get deeper into the nooks and crannies where the bacteria might reside, and able to cover a larger surface area was the primary problem. And so that's when he came up with the concept of, instead of a little sponge or the swab, rub it across the surface, he realized that, getting more aggressive, having a wet vacuum concept would be more effective. And so he came, over a period of about 10 years, he developed the M-Vac into what it currently is. And yeah, so we launched it initially in 2007 into the food industry, and we found that they want to put out safe product, but they don't want to know everything. So it was too sensitive, basically.
Yeah. So it was too good of a product that the food industry didn't want to go with it, or?
Basically, yeah. In my 20 years of sales, I've never had a customer tell me, your product's just too good, so we're not going to use it.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Well, the moral of that story, like I said at ASOC, is cook your food. But so we found ourselves in a dilemma. We were like, well, we've got to find a win-win situation here, and we have this amazing product. We know it works. But we've got to find a market where people really want to find just minute amount of bacteria, or in this case, it's DNA. So about that same time frame, I ran into a college buddy of mine that had gone into the FBI, and I was describing the M-Vac to him, and he was like, "Man, that would have been amazing on some of my crime scenes." So we took it down to a private lab that's here in Salt Lake, and had them test it for us. And they came back and they basically said, we've never seen recoveries like this. And, In fact, one of the people said, "You guys should be doing backflips off this table. This thing is so good." So, it took us a couple years for that to fully sink in, but once it did, and we realized that the food industry, unless the USDA, the FDA puts them in a full headlock, they're never going to use this system. And so, we started talking to crime labs and some law enforcement agencies, and what we really didn't have the full awareness of after Sorensen Forensics had tested the M-Vac, they basically bought that system, and they started calling all the agencies that they help that had cold cases, and they were like, "Hey, we've got this new system. Let's start working on some of these cold cases." And so they started looking at, I think the very first case that they ever used it on was a little girl. I think she was 6, had been raped and murdered and thrown into a creek. And they had tried the traditional methods, what we call them, swabbing and taping, even cutting, if you're familiar with those collection methods. But yeah, they started working some of these other cases and getting great results. And so that's kind of, in addition to the data that they created testing the M-Vac, they also started getting case successes. And so that's kind of how we accidentally fell into the forensics market. And now here we are, 7 years later, we're going strong. So,
had your father ever invented anything like this before? This was his hands-on invention, correct?
Oh yeah. The idea just came to him. One night he was laying on what he called his thinking couch, just trying to kind of go, mull over some of his small business issues. And but this had always been lingering in the back of his head. He's like, how do I get a better sample? And yeah, the idea just came to him. He's like, well, if you want to get deep into a carpet, to get the stain, your kids dump some juice on your carpet, you can sweep it up with a hand broom, which is the equivalent of the swab, or you can get nasty with it and you get in there with the carpet cleaner and you get that whole stain up. And that's essentially the same concept. And so, yeah, he invented it from top to bottom. And unfortunately, he passed away in 2009. So he never really saw what we're doing in the forensics market with it. But I know it was always kind of in the back of his mind. And I know he's watching from, up above. And that's, but it's cool. It's just being able to carry on his legacy is just something that, absolutely drives me.
I mean, it's a groundbreaking invention. It's a groundbreaking revelation in DNA collecting. It's really remarkable because there's so many things that are being done with DNA testing after the DNA has been collected, but it's all about that initial collection period. That is huge.
And it's great to know that there's one of these in every police station across the entire country.
Yeah. I wish that was a true statement right there. Holy cow.
Well, we got some pull. Just him saying that right now, you're going to get a bunch. I'm surprised they're not calling it now.
Well, I'm being sarcastic, but I guess my question is, why isn't that true?
That is a really, really good question. It's we get some pushback from some of the labs. They don't want to be bothered with it. It kind of interrupts their processes. As sad as that is to say. But another part is just, there's so many, especially in the U.S., there's around 18,000 police agencies and close to 800,000 police officers. I don't know how many detectives, or crime scene investigators would be in that group, but it's so fractured. There's no way to actually, get the information out on a mass basis that all these law enforcement agencies are going to see. And so it's just taken us a long time to penetrate the market. And it's, in addition to that, the forensics market is different than anything I've ever been a part of, primarily just because, if they have to be so careful, if they only get one shot at it, they can't waste their opportunity on equipment that's been untested. So the first couple of years that we were doing this, that was always the question. We're like, well, who else is using it? And we say, well, there's one lab, and we have one data point, and that's not really a good answer. They're saying, well, when you have more data, when you have other agencies that are using it, then, hey, give us a call back. But so it's just taken us a while, but yeah, there's a lot of agencies. It's just been a gradual increase of both the attention that it's getting, the number of people that are calling us or emailing us saying, hey, we need a quote for this system. And, the procurement process is it's government. So, it's not like they can snap their fingers and say, hey, let's make this thing happen.
Right.
So,
okay. Well, what does that mean?
What do you mean?
The procurement process and because it's government.
Well, even when we talk to these agencies and they look at the system, they're going, yeah, man, that thing's awesome. We want to get it. They still have to budget the money.
Okay.
Or they have to apply for a grant. And so the actual, we're trying to reduce this amount, but it's usually about a year and a half before agencies can actually pick it up, if they're all the way on top of it. And so a lot of them just don't have the funding for it.
Gotcha. I just wanted to avoid any confusion that people thought that this product was owned by the government and it was a process to sort of contract it out from the government. It's actually what you're saying the other way around. You want to license it to government-funded agencies, so getting the procurement for the budget to do so is a little difficult.
Oh, right. Yeah. Apologize if that any confusion there, but
no, that's just it's all on my end. It's not on your end.
No, it's just one of those where these guys there's a lengthy process for any government purchases, and depending on the size of the agency, it seems that the bigger the agency, the more red tape you have to go through, and so I mean, there's an agency in New York State. It took them 4 years to actually get the funding for it. So some agencies are pretty fast, but others, it averages about a year and a half. And so that's a pretty long sales cycle for anybody that's done any kind of sales.
Yeah. And what is the cost, if you don't mind me asking?
No, not at all. It's the initial package comes out to about $44,000, and that gives them enough supplies to do about 30 items. The training, the first year of maintenance, all that stuff. It's all combined in the first one. Some agencies are opting out for a little more supplies, maybe have like a 3-year supply. And so that's up in the 60, 65 range. But yeah, it's there's some agencies are telling us, man, for a piece of DNA equipment and for what it'll do, we're not charging enough. But our goal is to have it cheap enough that even the smaller agencies can afford it, but enough that we can stay in business. That's typically important.
Yeah, and the goal is saving lives, and so I don't know that you can really attribute an appropriate cost. Now, if we could we please get into some of the data here that's extremely impressive? The Boston University data graph that was in your presentation is particularly eye-opening to us. There's colors on it, and and the M-Vac color is much better
Seems
than
to
the
be
other
bigger.
ones. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, a bigger graph, a bigger bar on the graph is typically a good thing. Yeah. It's Boston University took a little different approach than like the Sorensen did. Sorensen Forensics at Crime Lab did. They were looking at different dilutions of blood, and they looked on 3 different surfaces, ceramic tile and denim and carpet. And of those 3, the ceramic tile there wasn't a huge difference between the M-Vac, the taping, and the swabbing. But that's exactly what any investigator would expect. If it's a non-porous surface, meaning like a tabletop or something that's it's hard, it's smooth. There's not a lot of nooks and crannies for the DNA material. When I say DNA material, I mean skin cells, blood, saliva, whatever biostain they're looking for. There's really nowhere for it to go. And so if it's a relatively small area, then we typically recommend, use the swab. That'll do just fine. But if it's a larger area, meaning like bigger than like a 1 foot square area, the swab just basically spreads it around. So it's not, it reaches a point where the swab is saturated. It doesn't actually collect anymore. So larger areas, or if it's a porous surface, like on that particular study, denim's the one that I usually show, because that's a surface that most cases have some kind of clothing item, and denim is usually everybody wears Levi's, right?
Yeah.
But then the carpet looked very similar to that. The separations of the bars was pretty dramatic, and that's exactly what you would expect. Again, we go back to the handheld broom versus the carpet cleaner. Which one's going to clean the stain off of the carpet or your couch better?
Yeah.
Obviously, the carpet cleaner's gonna win out on that pretty much every time.
And so when you say swab, you essentially mean like a Q-tip is in twirling and trying to take a sample. So it's that versus like something that can vacuum up samples. Yeah, it's sounds like a pretty distinct, huge difference, really, on a porous surface.
You use
right.
Do you use a certain chemical to pull the samples up, and then it separates from the DNA?
Great question. Yeah.
Well, the solution that is sprayed down it's mostly sterile water. It's got a little bit of phosphate salt in it as a stabilizer, but it's more the mechanical action than it is a chemical action. So the mechanical action of the water spraying, and then the vacuum pressure that it's applied, it creates like a little mini hurricane down there. And so that enables the, again, whatever you're looking for, the saliva or touch DNA to be collected from the surface. So it doesn't, there's no chemical reaction that's actually happening, which is another reason why in the court process, it's accepted pretty readily, just because it doesn't change the chemical composure, or if you will, of the actual DNA yet. All it does is collect it. It moves it from the evidence to the collection bottle, and then eventually onto a filter, and that's what gets sent to the lab. And then the lab actually goes through that whole process the same way they do a swab. So it's all it does is collect. It doesn't actually do any kind of analysis.
Okay, great.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that was when you did your presentation at ASOC. I was trying to wrap my head around how the DNA is not sort of compromised during the whole process.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because you're using sterile material.
DNA has a habit of breaking down if it's exposed to elements, including liquid, if it's there for a long time. But so, obviously when they use the M-Vac on it, they can't leave it suspended in the liquid for, a really long time. But as long as it's concentrated relatively quickly, then it's not going to cause those cells to burst open, which is called lysing. It's not going to cause those cells to burst open a whole lot. And so, yeah, all it does is basically transfer the DNA from the evidence to a medium that the lab can then process.
Okay, and how is the M-Vac at collecting DNA from skin? It's
actually pretty effective. That's UC Davis did a study that was all skin oriented. They originally started with the thought of more of a focus on how to get DNA off of a child. If a child was molested and touched in certain areas, could they collect that either saliva or DNA, touch DNA from that child? And then it kind of worked over into what if there was a rape victim, for example, that had showered, and which is really typical. Any female that's gone through a rape the first thing they want to do is they're just grossed out. They just want to get clean. And so that's a real problem. They wash away a lot of the evidence that might actually help convict the rapist. So if there's any women listening to this out there, if you are sexually assaulted, go straight to the police. And they can collect DNA from your skin, from your clothing, from areas depending on whatever the scenario is, and that way you don't waste it. It's really important. But anyway, they also wanted to see, could they get it even after showering, and that was their second phase of the validation that they did. And amazingly, especially around the neck area, they could still do it.
Absolutely incredible. So they can still get a sample after a shower.
Right. And not so much on the more exposed areas like, the thigh or the abdomen, but around the neck area, especially with women with longer hair, it kind of prevents the shower water from impeding into around the neck area. And so if there's any kind of activity there, choking or, whatever happens, especially during a sexual assault, it can get really weird. But even with just choking, they can still go and try to collect that DNA from, the contact DNA from the suspect's hands.
Now, what about on clothing?
Clothing and, porous surfaces like that, that's where the M-Vac really starts to shine. It can be, in fact, the FBI just released their data, and we just put out a press release yesterday. I think I sent it to you guys. It was between 5 and 47 times better than a swab.
Wow.
So depending on the surface. Yeah, they tested it on, everywhere from pressed wood to all the way to sheetrock. Untreated sheetrock didn't do very well for either the swab or the M-Vac, but you'd kind of expect that. I bet it's like chalk.
Sure.
You just absorb it. But the other surfaces, the M-Vac did really well.
Now, how minute can it get? Can you get it off of something that's like so minute that you wouldn't even be able to swab?
You're talking like the surface area that it's covering, or the number of cells?
The surface area.
Well, the surface area, if it's a really, really small surface area, that's really not where the M-Vac is going to be your best tool.
Okay.
Like if you have a blood spatter, for example, someone gets shot and their blood is spraying all over the place, especially if it's visible. If you can see it, then the swabbing or other methods work just fine. Mm-hmm. If you have like one little blood spot on a shirt, that's right there is where actually the cutting method would probably be better than using the M-Vac. So being able to cover a larger surface area is where you'd switch to the M-Vac. But if it's a really small area, then probably swabbing or cutting would be a better method.
So the M-Vac would work really well on, say, the back seat of a car in a situation where there might have been a struggle in the back seat of a car and that person was found murdered.
Right. Well, yeah. In fact, there was a case in South Africa where they actually a victim in a Colt killing was transported in a car, and it was the suspect's car. And so they had to place her in the car to make sure that, could tie her death to the suspect. And they did 4 different samples, one of each, basically compartment area. And it showed that she was riding in the back seat behind the driver on the way to this party. So, they coined it as a party, but it was a Colt killing. Pretty weird. You can cover pretty large surface areas. If a victim is transported in the trunk of a car, you could sample the entire trunk if you needed to.
Now, in that case where the eventual victim was sitting behind the driver in the car, it wasn't like, did the attack happen in the car or something? Like, it wasn't like the DNA sample was blood, right? It wasn't saliva.
Like
it was
cells.
Skin cell,
cells,
right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just, which is what we call touch DNA or trace DNA.
Right.
That's, every person sloughs off an average of 400,000 cells a day. And so you're leaving your DNA everywhere. And which is why, some people freak out when they hear about systems like the M-Vac and how sensitive DNA is becoming, between the collection and the lab processes. But understand, it's just one cog in the wheel. It's just one piece of evidence. And, if your DNA shows up somewhere, it doesn't mean you're automatically going to go to jail for whatever crime happened. That just means that that's one of the things that if you can explain why your DNA got there, then, you have no problems. But being able to find DNA, how much DNA is in there, they can tell that as well. It's if it's just one of 2 or 3 people that they find in there, they can also determine, well, your DNA represented, it's not an exact science, but say it's an estimate of 20% of the DNA that's there, and somebody else represents 70%, then more than likely that 70%er is going to be more of a suspect than your 20% or your 5% or whatever.
Now, in contrast, if you use the swab method for that victim in the back seat, would you have been able to get a sample, or you just would have had to have guessed where skin cells were?
Well, it depends. I mean, it's for touch DNA, because you can't visibly see it. There's no like alternative light source that's going to illuminate it.
Right.
A lot of that is guesswork. So, that's where the actual crime scene analysis is so important. Say, exactly what happened here. And so if you're sitting in the back seat of a car, then you got to think, well, when you sit in the back seat of a car, what do you typically touch? You're going to touch the seat where you're getting in. You're going to touch the seat. You got it right. The door. You got to place your hand somewhere. Those are the kind of things that I went through, and they said, well, there's a good chance that this is where she was. So let's get aggressive and let's M-Vac the majority of this seat area. And they had already tried swabbing it. So the swabbing hadn't produced any viable results. And amazingly, most of the cases that the M-Vac is used on, they've already tried a different method. They've already tried, it's usually swabbing. That's the most common collection method. But if it's swabbing or cutting or even taping, they can do kind of a taping method. And then there's even a scraping method where they'll take a scalpel and scrape the top of like a shirt or something and collect that. But if there's ample DNA there, then those methods all work great. Like I said, a visible blood stain is a really good example. Or if they can use like a alternative light source, you guys have seen those.
Sure.
Like blue light, basically, they can shine it on there, and different stains, if you were, like a saliva stain is going to luminesce different than a blood stain or a semen stain. So, but touch DNA, you can't see it. So it's all based on, this scenario. Did I grab your right sleeve, during when we were scuffling, that kind of thing. And so they say, well, yeah, where on the sleeve? And that's really important too when you're using some of those other methods. You have to know exactly where.
Yeah.
Because they can only really adequately collect from a really small area. Whereas the M-Vac, it allows you to cover, instead of maybe, like if you can see this, instead of like this little spot here, you could cover the entire shoulder. So just something like that. It just gives investigators a little more flexibility. But at the same time, they have to be careful, because if there's, if somebody was in a bar, for example, and a lot of people are brushing up against you, and, it's a really packed bar, so there could be 20 people whose DNA is on that person's shoulder. It's sometimes that's not going to, collecting more isn't always better.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Do you get any pushback from any of these organizations that you are promoting the M-Vac to? And do they say, well, it's almost better to just get the swab where I know that where, the as limited amount of results as possible, as opposed to a wider net?
Well, yes, we do get pushback like that, and some people are thinking that, there's even the philosophy that if you lightly swab over the top of an area, that you'll get the last person that touched there, which is just garbage. DNA isn't deposited that way. So yeah, you can collect just junk DNA. If you're sampling the hotel carpet, for example, where 100 people have walked over just that day, you're not going to get a good sample. It's really limited to even with what's called probabilistic genotyping software, which helps decipher mixtures. You're still kind of limited to, say, 4 or 5 people within that sample. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times the swabbing method may be used. It'll collect some DNA. They'll have little peaks in there that they can identify, but there's a threshold that has to be met before they can actually say, yes, this is a viable sample. And so on those kind of scenarios, we can go back over the same area with the M-Vac, sample it again, and more often than not, it'll come back with better results. So it's pretty amazing the ability for the M-Vac to collect deeper into a surface, even after swabbing has been tried. There's still usually enough DNA there that they can get a good sample.
Now, do you have a tagline for the M-Vac yet?
A tagline?
Yeah.
I don't know. It just sucks better than anything else.
Okay, so you have an unofficial tagline.
That's great.
I have some that I wanted to pitch to you.
That's a good one or not.
Well, I have a couple I wanted to pitch to you real quick.
It's elevator pitches.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
M-Vac, bad news for bad guys.
Okay.
Okay. M-Vac, criminals, you're screwed now. Okay. M-Vac, criminals, we'll vacuum up your freedom.
I like that better because there's some suggestion of the sucking method.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your crimes suck.
We suck harder. Yeah.
Okay, sorry for that.
No worries.
Those are fun. I actually started making a T-shirt once that actually said, like, criminals suck, but we suck more.
Yeah, that's great.
That's great.
Yeah,
there you go.
That's why you do this professionally.
Yeah, right. Yeah, this is delving into the weeds here, isn't it? No. So my wife wouldn't let me print those T-shirts. I thought awesome.
It's an attention getter. Yeah.
She said no.
All right, okay. We'll do it for you.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
So there's this one slide here that I see that says M-Vac from the Philadelphia PD says M-Vac is 180 times more effective than swab in saliva collection.
Uh-huh.
And wow, is that a specific surface or is that just in general?
In that validation, I think it was a specific surface. I want to say that was a almost like a towel, like a light towel.
Okay.
I don't know, a ShamWow type of a surface, I guess. But yeah, that was saliva off of there, and that was pretty impressive data.
Yeah, I'd say so. And congrats on the FBI data that came out this week. I was just looking at that, and that is very impressive. You got some great quotes in there too. People are very impressed by this product.
Yeah, well, the agencies that are using it, and there's some agencies now that have had it for 5-6 years. They're solving cases left and right with it, and some agencies they're pretty selective on what types of cases they'll use it on, but their success rate's up in the 90 percentiles. Meaning that a lot of these are coming back. So these are mostly like swab failures, where they couldn't get a good enough profile to move the case forward. they're going back over it with the M-Vac and getting 90% of the time getting a better profile. That's a pretty phenomenal rate. Now that's not totally typical, but it's I'd say on average it's probably 50-60% of the time it's coming back with pretty good results, and that's a lot of times, again, there's this threshold that they have to push it above. And if you can collect more DNA, more often than not, you're able to push the alleles, the actual signature of the DNA profile above that threshold. And once that happens, that's when the lab can say, yes, this is Jared, or yes, this is Tim, and be able to compare it. If it's below that threshold, then they just look at it and they say, well, yeah, we see some things in there, but legally we can't make any kind of a quantification or qualification on it. And so of all the investigators I talk to, that's just the ultimate frustration to them.
Have you been in contact with any of the organizations that handle unidentified victims, like NamUs or any of those types of organizations? And can you provide any services to them? Can you do something directly off of skeletal remains or anything like that?
Well, the skeletal remains, typically not, just because especially if they've been in there, years instead of months. It's more they can get into the bone marrow and collect some of that bone marrow. So that's not really something the M-Vac would get used on. But there is a case in California that's being tried right now, where the victims were buried in some shallow graves in the Victorville area. It's kind of desertous, high desert type of atmosphere, I guess. But they were buried for 3 years, and the M-Vac was able to collect viable profiles off of that clothing that wasn't the victims, and it wasn't the suspect. So, who these 3 profiles are that they collected, it remains to be seen. But DNA off of clothing that's been buried 3 years. That was a pretty amazing phone call that we had on that one.
So how far back do you think that this could go, as far as duration of DNA lingering in a particular material?
Well, if the material is protected, if it's been collected properly, meaning that, like, the detectives didn't slobber all over it or whatever, even the touch DNA from their hands, which is amazing, because you start going back to cases that are like older than 20 years. So DNA didn't really come on the scene until around 97, 98, somewhere around there. So anything older than that, if the fact that it was collected properly is just amazing. But if it's stored properly, so if it's collected properly and stored properly, meaning that it's in a dry, controlled atmosphere, limited amounts of humidity, it can last, I don't know, I can't say indefinitely, but it can last for years and years. It's the oldest case that we know of is 52 years old.
Oh, we got one better. We got one for you.
Define
All right,
better.
bring it on.
Yeah, we got over 100 years old.
Okay.
And the material was collected. I doubt it had a very strict collection method, but it has been stored in in sealed bags, sort of on display in this town's sort of civic center is what they call it. So it's this historic murder that happened, and there's a lot of there's a lot of material, like a burlap bag that was put over his head. He was wrapped in a horse blanket, bloody socks. I mean, his clothing, shoes. And
But we have the victim's DNA and identity. But I guess the question is, could that pull up someone else's from that long ago?
Yeah, from part of a struggle, because it was definitely a fight.
Okay.
So that's what we got. So when you're ready, we'll swing you up to Jaffrey, New Hampshire.
Oh, right on. Well, let's go. Okay. So, but what you're saying is that there's potential for that. Nothing's actually been collected yet.
There's been no DNA collected on this material.
Okay. Well, what I was telling you with a 52-year-old case is that's one where the M-Vac has actually produced a profile.
Okay.
So 52 years old. Yeah. So it's, and that one had every single other traditional method had been tried. And, but once they used the M-Vac on it, they finally got a good profile. So that one hasn't been adjudicated yet, so I can't really give any details of it yet. But yeah, when that one comes out, it's going to be big.
Great.
It's going to be really big.
Okay.
Yeah, let us know.
When that happens, when you're looking at something that's 52 years old and you get the information, and then you say we were able to build a profile off of that, you collect the DNA and then you send it to what lab? What lab do you send it to, and then what do they compare it to in their database?
Well, there's probably 23 labs in the U.S. now that will process M-Vac filters.
Oh, okay.
Which is really low considering there's 400 labs. So we got a lot of work to do. But essentially, once it's collected, then they have their DNA processing systems, and they process it basically the same way they do a swab. And then once that spits out a result, they can, if depending on how strong the profile is, determines what database it can be loaded into. Now, if they have a suspect in mind and they're able to get a buccal swab from that suspect, then they can do a direct comparison. But if they don't, then they have to load it into a DNA database like CODIS. That's the national FBI database. And like this 52-year-old case, for example, they had a suspect, but when they compared it, it wasn't the guy they thought it was. So they were able to, totally, go a different direction on that. But now they don't have a suspect. They're like, and he wasn't in the CODIS database. So now they're trying to figure out, well, what do we do? Got to go back and do more police work. But that's also where that genealogical DNA, the way they caught the Golden State Killer.
Sure.
They're starting to move toward that direction to try to get some kind of a semblance of, well, maybe he's not in there, but maybe one of his relatives are, so we can find something close.
Yeah, and sort of triangulate from there.
That's great.
Right. Yeah, that's really amazing. I mean, all the advances in these investigative techniques, you got like Parabon, they can take the DNA profile and basically show what the guy looks like. I mean, you actually get a facial structures and, find out his the gender, find out the race, all that kind of stuff. That's just amazing.
It's impressive. Yeah.
Yeah. But, it all begins with collection.
It sure does. And am I mistaken here in this case number 7 from your presentation? It says that a 6-year-old child's body was submerged for 8 to 10 in water for 8 to 10 hours, and and then was the M-Vac able to get a sample after that?
Yeah. I can't remember the exact like how many alleles were present, but it's I know they got at least a partial profile off of her panties.
Incredible.
Yeah, that was, and in fact, I think that was the very first case that the M-Vac was ever used on.
Wow, and that's just no way something the swab would ever be able to get, right? They had already tried the swab. Yeah, and they'd already tried the cutting method too. So wow.
It's something like that where most of the DNA had been washed away. And if it hadn't been washed away, being exposed to water for that long, a lot of those cells are going to be lysed, and so they're going to lose DNA that way. So yeah, there was very, very little, just minute amounts of DNA there. But if it's there, the M-Vac will get it.
Love it.
Now, is this a product that you're exclusively hoping law enforcement picks up on, or would you be able to contract out to a private citizen who has a connection to a lab and they could do the back-end work where they match it up? Have you ever had anyone request that from you?
We've had, especially victims' families call us.
Yeah.
A victim's family has a fair amount of pull with the agencies, but sometimes, they can kind of help gather information and present it to the law enforcement agency that's responsible for the case. I haven't ever heard of one where, the case was closed and they were able to reopen it, based on M-Vac testing, but the problem is the chain of custody. Once that evidence, a shirt or something that the victim wore, once that's released and it's no longer in the chain of custody, there's, who knows what had happened to it really. And so you kind of lose any kind of value as far as, being able to actually convict somebody in a court of law.
Right.
But if they just wanted to find out what happened, I guess they could spend the money and go to a private lab that had the M-Vac and go that direction. But, to what end? That's the question.
Right. And then what will you do with the results? Because if you take the results to law enforcement, that still doesn't guarantee law enforcement has probable cause to then, lock the perp up. You could actually ruin a case if you try to do it on your own.
Oh yeah. That's not a good idea. I mean, it's there have been cases where the victim's family learned about the M-Vac, took the information that I'll send anybody our flyer, or they can download information off of our website and things like that. So if they took that information to the police agency or sheriff's office that has responsibility for their case and said, hey, what do you think about this? I've known scenarios like that where the police go, oh, well, yeah, I didn't know about that thing. Let's give it a try. And they've gotten results that way.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool.
Yeah. No, it's victims' families. I'll tell you what, well, as you can imagine, if someone you loved was murdered or raped or something and the police just didn't have any leads, that doesn't lessen the pain for the victims' families.
Right.
So even if the police have to move on to other cases because the caseload doesn't ever stop, and I've never heard of them just completely forgetting about a case, but until new leads are developed, they have to focus on the ones they can solve. But it doesn't mean the families are going to ever stop. And so if something comes up, they learn about new technology, which is the case with the M-Vac all the time. Yeah, boy, they'll hound the police until they actually use it.
Okay, so in that scenario where the victims' families will take the information to law enforcement and say this M-Vac thing exists, can you use it? And they agree to use it. Do you send them one of the devices, or do you send somebody out there? Do you fly out to, say, New Hampshire to go help on this cold case and you're doing the actual collection, or do you instruct somebody on how to do it?
Well, typically, I have flown out to some places and, taken the equipment and everything. But it's typically better to just send the evidence to a lab. Like there's like 4 private labs that have an M-Vac. And so it's typically, they'll just coordinate with another agency that has an M-Vac or a private lab that has one. Or sometimes there's a public lab that maybe 2 sheriff's departments have a memorandum of understanding where, they'll help each other. But rather than us actually flying out and helping them do it, it's typically better just to take it to a crime lab. Now, here in Utah, I've done that. Like before Salt Lake PD bought a system, we took a system up there. They had a case where it was like a gang violence type of a case. It was almost like a hit from one gang on another gang member. And so we took a system up there. I mean, they're local, so, had to drive all the 20 minutes. But we took the system up there. They bought the supplies and yeah, we stood there. We taught them how to do it. And then we stood there and helped them just kind of, I typically don't insert myself into the chain of custody, but I'll teach the people and just show them how to do it right there. And, with just a little bit of coaching, they can typically do it right, by themselves.
Well, off the air, offline, we'll give you our mailing address and just feel free to ship one over to the Crawl Space Studios.
We won't tell anyone.
And we won't tell you. We'll just start performing our own DNA tests on all these various cases that we work on, and it'll be revolutionary.
Oh yeah, I'm sure the prosecuting attorneys are going to be thrilled to hear this.
They would love it.
They've given us so many keys to cities.
Yeah.
They don't even. This would just be like a cherry on top.
We have like a janitor's key ring of keys to the city.
Wow, who knew?
So 50+% of evidence resampled with M-Vac came back with at least a partial profile, and these are the surfaces that the M-Vac has had success on: curtains, bed sheets, ligatures, ropes, ski mask, wigs, shell casing, keys, gun parts, socks, clothes, pockets, rifles, animal hides, and the one that stands out to me is sledgehammer.
Okay.
So that was I guess trace evidence found on like skin cells found on a sledgehammer, I take it.
Yeah, that's if there's any kind of blood or something on a sledgehammer, again, because that's a non-porous surface, typically the swabbing would do just fine. But yeah,
right.
if somebody's gripped that sledgehammer and
the handle,
done the damage, then getting the DNA off of that entire, the handle is pretty important. So I even heard. So this is another case that just heard of recently, where down in the South, where they have a lot of canals and things, there was a guy that I believe it was his girlfriend, beat her to death with a baseball bat, and then as he was driving away, threw the baseball bat in this canal, and it was deep enough that a dive team had to go down and get it, and it was down there for at least a number of hours, and so they took the M-Vac out there, and right there on the shore, they laid out some sterile plastic. The dive team brought the baseball bat up out of the canal, and they sampled it with the M-Vac right there, and they got the guy's profile. So, yeah,
amazing.
Was this a aluminum baseball bat or a wooden baseball bat?
It was, I believe, it was aluminum, because they had the around the grip,
like a rubber grip.
Yeah.
And they retrieved the DNA off of the rubber grip of the baseball bat after it had been submerged.
Yes.
That's pretty cool. What I think is a fun dynamic is when Tim read off all of the materials, all the surfaces that the M-Vac has collected DNA from, and your reaction to that was just, yep. And while our reaction to it is like, holy shit, like this is insane. You're like, yeah, this is my business.
Yeah. Well, some of them seem a little more obvious than others based on, this conversation already. But this picks up where swabbing leaves off. I mean, this isn't to replace swabbing. This is to be used in addition to it, and it can literally save lives.
And you've said numerous times in this scenario, just use swabbing. Or use
sure.
a cutting method.
Yeah,
and
don't waste an M-Vac on that.
A couple of things that were impressive about this: shell casing and keys. I think that's pretty impressive. Keys are pretty small, and shell casings are pretty small, unless it's like a cannon. But they're pretty small, and that's impressive to me.
Well, yeah, that's there's a senior CSI here in the Salt Lake Valley named Francine Bardole, and she's kind of become got the title of the M-Vac Queen. She was one of the very first agencies that bought a system, and she's been doing amazing things with it. Well, she got her master's in serology and was working in the crime lab for a couple days a week, and found herself with a pair of tweezers trying to swab some fingernail clippings, and she just thought, oh, this is just ridiculous. There's got to be a better way to do this. And so she came up with the idea of just submerging the fingernail clippings in an M-Vac bottle, which is about a 250 milliliter bottle. So about half the size of a Coke can, maybe.
Okay. And
you fill it up with about half full with liquid. And then she dumped all the fingernail clippings in that, and then vortexed it, or agitated it really well for a couple of minutes, and then poured it over the M-Vac filter, and got a great profile. And so she thought, well, if I could do that with fingernail clippings, why not try it with shell casings?
Yep.
And so she had a case where they had was the victim's body and then 10 shell casings. And so she tried that same submersion method with these shell casings, and she got a profile. And she's also been able to do the same thing with, like you said, keys, with jewelry, with parts of a weapon. So like if you break a 9mm pistol down to, you got the magazine, you got the grip, you got the trigger housing, you got the slide, and she's been able to find profiles off of all of those. And so on this one particular case where she tested, again, the magazine and the trigger housing and the slide, she got the same guy off each one of them. And so based on that, she knew you loaded the magazine, you cocked the gun and chambered around, and then you pulled the trigger. And so that's pretty incriminating evidence.
I'd say so.
That's incredible.
Yeah, Forensics Magazine actually highlighted that Bardot method, and other agencies have been able to duplicate it too. So it's pretty phenomenal.
So she's actually got a method named after her.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, we coined that and then helped spread it around, and yeah, we're trying to make Francine just the most famous woman in the world as far as the M-Vac. So.
Awesome. Well, forward her contact over to us, and we can have her on as a follow-up. That'd be fun.
Oh yeah, no, I imagine she'd love it. She's involved with cold case societies, and
great.
She would be a really interesting guest.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and bravo, and congratulations.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an incredible product, an incredible device that is used to literally save lives, and I'm honored to talk to you about it.
Yeah, really humbled. And you know why it's such a great invention is because it's such an obvious invention. It's such if you're looking at how to collect DNA and you're like, there's got to be a better way. Like there is. This is the obvious. It's such a great idea because it's obviously a great idea.